Good.
All right. I'll call the meeting to order. The first thing on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from October 1st. That seems like forever ago. I don't know if anyone had any changes or comments on those.
No.
Do I have a motion to accept them?
I'll make the motion.
Ron, is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second.
Was that Ken?
Yes.
Okay. And all those in favor? Aye.
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 All right. Is anyone opposed or abstaining? All right. We're good then. The next thing then is you all got the revised rate for water and sewer that Ralph Tellis sent. At our last meeting, he had a fixed rate and a variable volumetric charge, not a variable charge, a volumetric charge. And what we kind of tasked him with was to go back and give us some options that would have a base amount of usage in the rate, where if people, conserved and used less than a certain amount, they would have no charge, or they would at least get that amount at no additional charge and then would only pay after that point. So I assume everybody got this and has looked at the four options. There's one at a lower fixed quarterly charge of $10.27, one with no usage allowance, and one with a 9,000 gallon quarterly allowance. Oh, look at that. Geez, Ron, you're good.
It's getting the hang of this thing.
All right. And then the third and fourth options are a higher fixed quarterly fee. And again, the first one being with no usage allowance, and the second one having the 9,000 gallon quarterly allowance. So I'd just like to get people's feedback and thoughts on these four structures.
Jay, this is Dennis. I have a question.
Yeah.
So the quarterly fixed charge allowance, is that, that's for a meter coming into a residence, so on and so on? Does it matter what size meter it is? We had originally talked about different size meters. For instance, here at Riverwalk, I have a 6-inch meter that comes into the building, and at my house, I probably have a 1/2-inch meter or 3/4-inch meter coming into the building.
And that is an excellent question. In the original rate structure, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pipe size. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
There's 8 different pipe sizes with a different fixed charge for each.
Correct.
Ray, you can correct me, but I believe that what we're looking at here is that base fixed charge for that 5/8 standard residential line.
That's how I understand the analysis that Ralph Tellis did, the most recent analysis. Again, I think the question that was put before them was particularly as it relates to the issue surrounding the cost allocation between the transient population as opposed to the full-time residential population, and the transfer of costs from the transient to the full-time. I think that was really the specific issue that Ralph Tellis was trying to, or the question that they were trying to answer in their most recent information. So I think, the question that Dennis raises is, best, answered by Ralph Tellis, but I do know that in our work, sometimes the gallonage for the fixed rate charge, it will differ between the user category. For example, user categories would be residential, industrial, institutional, commercial. So the fixed gallon charge, the amount of gallons for the fixed charge could differ between each one of those user categories. I don't think Dave got to that level of detail here in his analysis, certainly. This would be for a residential customer.
This is just a sample for the residential customer.
Yes, this is
And there
just
will be a different charge for every different size meter.
correct. That's what he initially had
That's where we go.
proposed. And again, it gets down, it really, and you basically do these breakdowns. It's really how the profile of your community. So like with your community, you don't have a lot of industrial customers. So you probably wouldn't have like an industrial rate. You would have more residential versus non-residential, or residential versus, I mean, the three user categories I could envision for your community would be residential, commercial, and then institutional.
Right.
And there may be a different, at the end of the day, there may be a different gallonage assigned in terms of relative to the fixed charge assigned to each one of those user categories. But that would be something Dave would have to tell us.
Sure. OJ, can I give you an example of, because I have obviously several properties in Massachusetts, and they go by the different size meters on the rate, and then there's an allowance for a different size meter. And I do know that at some of my properties, or myself or my managers, we watch it so that, let's say with this size meter, you pay this quarterly rate, and you're allowed, the family or the property is allowed to use, I'm just rounding off a number, 100,000 gallons. And I do know that we watch it on a quarterly basis, and we like to keep it under the 100,000 gallons, because when you get into talk about conservation, which is what we're trying to do, when we get over the 100,000 gallons, the rate jumps by like 25% for over 100,000 gallons on a per gallon basis, or on a per 1,000 gallon basis for the usage of the water. And we sometimes watch that pretty closely, and so that we're not paying this 30% more for the water going forward. So we cut it down. And it works out pretty well. So that's just my 2 cents on my example at how we watch it. The properties I have in Massachusetts, and most of the towns in Massachusetts do it that way.
And do you get a allotment of water based on your flat fee that you don't pay? You do.
Yes,
So there's an allotment, then there's a fixed charge, and then if you go above a certain amount, then there's an even higher fixed charge.
correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they would call that the volumetric charge.
Yeah.
There's a fixed charge and then a volumetric charge. And if you go over a certain amount of water, then the volumetric charge kicks in on top of that fixed charge.
Correct. And it works out pretty well. As a, for instance, because I have a home in Yarmouth as well. And I sometimes watch it. One year I say, why was my water bill $600? Is because I used the sprinkler system a whole lot that year. So the following year, I'll turn down my sprinkler system to once every 3 days instead of every day. Then my water bill turns into $350. So it's all about conservation. It really is.
So that would be a testament to conservation and the rate
Yes.
structure that Dave's proposing here.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Right.
And that's what we're trying to accomplish here as well. So you can tell all my guests at Riverwalk that you can only flush every other time. So although Riverwalk is pretty conservative in itself with all the different limited capacity water faucets that we have here, so, and toilets.
Any other, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was going to say, I like the option of an allowance and then volumetric rating. I think for the full-time residents here, that works really well. I've talked numerous times about when I lived in Woodstock and what they have going on over there, and that's what they're doing. I personally think that the allowance over there is too high to promote any sort of conservation, really, unless they've changed it, and they may have since I left. But as a family of four, we weren't coming anywhere near hitting the allowance number that they had. So I like that option here. I think that's the way to go. I got to think a little more whether it's option 2 or 4 that I would prefer. I guess I question on the recovery of 50% of revenues. That's 50% of revenues to cover our costs, or how? I'm confused on the wording there, I guess. Is that revenue on top of cost coverage, or is it 50% of costs being covered by this?
I believe it's, maybe Ray should answer, but I think it's 50% of the total cost of water and sewer operations are covered by the fixed cost.
Okay.
Or 20% or 50%, depending on which option.
Which
it
one?
is.
Right. Okay.
Is that correct,
Right.
Ray?
Yeah, so the way it's structured is that, like if you look at option 1, it says quarterly fixed charge recovering 20% of revenue. So it's basically, that's what it is. So it's the question is how much of the fixed charge do you want to capture 20% of the revenues you need to financially, provide financial sustainability for your operations. So the option 1 and 2 are 20% of the revenues will come out of your fixed charge, and then options 3 and 4, it's saying 50% of your revenues are going to come from that fixed charge.
So in the scenario of everybody doesn't go over their allowance, which I know isn't what's going to happen, but if everybody stays below their allowance, we're covering 50% of our cost, which means through the rest of our taxation, we got to cover the rest of that cost. And I guess
Well, actually, the rest of your costs would be covered by hopefully by your volumetric charge.
well, I know I'm assuming it would, but if that weren't the case, we would still have to have.
Yeah, if this made such an effect on conservation that no one in town went over their 9,000 gallon a quarter limit, you're right, we'd only have enough money for half, but we'd be reducing our water usage by,
Drop.
yeah, I mean, that'd be a huge drop.
Right, but the way that would work is that if you structure it, for example, that 20% of your revenues is going to come out of your quarterly fixed charge, and you're not able, again, it gets to financial sustainability, and if you can't cover all of your operating costs, you're going to raise your rate. That's how that would work. You wouldn't go to your tax base or your general obligation funds to take money out of there to pay for your operation. You would have to raise your rate.
Yep. Okay.
That's how it would work. So basically, this structure that Dave is presenting here, it's, think of it in terms of like an enterprise fund. It's the users are fully paying for the cost of operation. So it's not like, if you had somebody who wasn't in the community but wasn't on the water system, they wouldn't be paying into the system. It would just be the users who would be paying into the system. But in your case, I think most of Lincoln is actually on the water system. We deal with a lot of communities where, maybe 40% of the community is on the water system, and that becomes a big challenge because your revenue base is so much smaller relative to the larger community.
Well, I will chime in and say that I agree with Jay that the 2 options with the usage allowance, I think are more preferable, and I say that mostly because I think that would be most acceptable to the voters who are going to vote this in. And of the 2 options with the usage allowance, I think it's option 4 that puts with the way it's structured, puts a higher percentage of the support on the seasonal homeowners. I mean, one thing about this town is that we have to have the capacity to produce 1.5 million gallons a day. We have to have all the pumps, all the pipes, all the tanks, all the equipment and manpower needed to maintain a system that can produce 1.5 million gallons a day. But then we get a day, you know, like, and pick any day in November where, you know, we probably didn't use half of our capacity, but we're all still paying for that. I think that option 4 puts more of the burden on some of those seasonal homeowners, that there's a cost to having that big of a structure that's not being used every day. You know, if you go down and look at under the seasonal, the top bracket of seasonals, if you compare option 2 and option 4, option 4 is higher in virtually every category of what he's calling seasonal, water users. And then if you get down to the year-round bracket, those are all less, and they're substantially less when we get up into the higher water users. You know, again, they'd be paying a higher base rate than what is reflected on this sheet, but they would be saving or reducing the money owed in the volumetric charge for just for those 2 largest group categories of users. So anyway,
Okay.
that's kind of my thought. Cindy,
OJ, I have a question. How are you going to differentiate seasonal from year-round users?
we're not.
No.
We're not. These are just categories. Everybody's going, under option 4, every residential place with a 5/8 inch line is going to pay $25.67 per quarter. They're going to get 9,000 free gallons. And over that, they're going to pay $2.40. These are just estimates of different seasonal users are using less water, and they're using most of their water in a single quarter. In other words, they're either up here for summer or up here for, so the rate and the charges are the same. It's the usage that we're just predicting.
Gotcha.
Kenny, did you have a question?
Just a real quick one, but I think it's answered already. The fixed quarterly charge that was based on service entrance, right? The size of your water line coming in.
Correct.
Okay. Yep.
So OJ, just
Yep.
as an example, forgive me if I keep using Massachusetts, of course, I have one home in Cape Cod. And I think I have a 3/4 inch line coming in that particular residence. My quarterly charge is $26. So, and Cape Cod is a seasonal atmosphere, just as this is. Maybe a little bit more seasonal, but that's the exact amount. It's $26 even per quarter. Then there's rates over and above that for usage. So,
Do you know what the volumetric charge is?
you know, I don't. And I was preparing for this meeting. I brought one of my bills up here from a hotel and from my home, and I can't find them. If we were to continue this meeting, I'll have them next week. I don't recall what it is. Wish I did. I do remember the $26 because to me, it's somewhat annoying that this particular town has no way of allowing money to pay online, and I literally have to write out a $26 check, which is almost unheard of nowadays, and mail it in. But anyway, that's how
That's
how
all changed.
Yeah, I know.
You can pay stuff online now here with the town clerk.
Yeah, you can. Right, but not on that little town there. But anyway,
So, OJ,
it works out well.
OJ, this is Ray. So, so one of the questions that I think was posed, or one of the concerns was, again, how does this affect the year-round resident versus the seasonal? And my understanding is that, we want to weigh heavily on the impact to the year-round resident. So you had mentioned that option 4 seemed like the best scenario. I would just draw your attention to, it really depends upon the use. So if you look in the left column, And if you look under the year-round category, and you see the 50,000 gallons and the 75,000 gallons, that's the range on an annual basis that a typical residential customer will use. So then go take your eye over to option 2 under 50,000 gallons, compare option 2 at 178.40 to 256.21 in terms of the annual bill. That's a 43% increase to the year-round customer. So when you're looking at the sweet spot on that particular concern and issue, the sweet spot is probably option 2 for you, based on my understanding of the issue of concern for the town. And Dave, I had this conversation with Dave Fox and he agreed with that.
Okay, and I guess I was looking up at the seasonal categories. And then if you do the same thing you just did and you look at option 2 versus option 4, in every one of those, all 5 usage categories, option 4 is more expensive for the seasonal.
Right, but it's also more expensive for the year round. So if you look at like 75,000 gallons a year for the year round
Yeah,
residents, they go from 359 to 369, option 2 versus option 4. So there's not a substantial difference between those options.
right.
So, and the use rate for the year-round seasonal is going to be between the 50 and the 75. So part of the calculation or the analysis needs to be you need to take into consideration you need to consider the use rate and what that ultimate water bill is going to be to the year-round resident. That's why option 2 would be more of a sweet spot for them.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Ray, one of my concerns with option 2 was the 1,000 gallon and 10,000 gallon users, which is probably not going to be too many residents, but it's going to be the business community.
Yeah.
If you look at that highest amount, 72,000, that's significantly higher than the 45 over in option 4. And I guess I saw option 4 as putting some of that balance onto the seasonal users. But I guess my question, going back to the allowance, this is looking at residents, and I don't even know if there's a residence that's going to use 10,000 gallons a quarter. A year.
Yeah, that just to give you some context about the 9,000 gallons per quarter, that's a per capita use rate of about 45 gallons per day. So typically when we're designing facilities, you're looking at use rates, again, depending upon whether you meter, you don't meter, in the configuration of the systems, you can use anywhere between 60 and 75 gallons per capita per day. That 9,000 gallons assumes 45. It's what, and I talked to Dave about it because I thought that number was low. And Dave's calculation, that 9,000 gallons represents what he calls essential water that people are, that they absolutely need in order for drinking and domestic use. So it's not like irrigation, car washing, other use rates. So he bases his calculation based on the essential water that's used by, in this case, this analysis, typical residential user. So, and a couple of things to point out is, number one, you can always put a rate structure, and it's what we do with our clients is, you know, we try to hit the target as close as we can to ensure that, you know, again, that long-term financial sustainability. But oftentimes when you put a rate structure in place you should, particularly in the first 3 years, you should evaluate it every year. But invariably in year 2, you're going to make some adjustments. And one of the things you can adjust is that fixed charge allocation of 9,000 gallons per quarter. Based on your meter records, you may want to adjust that, not only just your rate number, but also that particular number. So, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is, you know, I wouldn't get too hung up on if that's the right number or not. Once that rate structure goes into place and you collect your data for a year, then that will go a long way to telling you just really what the sweet spot ultimately is going to be. I don't know if that helped or not.
Oh, I think it helps. Ray is Jay. I'm 75,000 gallons of usage by a residential family just seems like a lot of water to me for a family to be using. So I forget the guy's name, but I understand what his trends are telling him. It just seems really, really high.
It is high. Again, that's 75,000 gallons a day is probably on the upper limit of what a residential, user would use. That's why Dave's giving you a kind of a full, a full range there. I think for Lincoln, I would again venture to say you're somewhere between that 50 and 75 for year-round resident, 50 to 75,000 gallons a day. And again, it also, that number depends upon the profile of the community. If you have a high-end residential gated community, in South Carolina, it's a different number than what you would find in a, small rural community in northern New Hampshire. So,
Right. This is Dennis. Do they talk about the number of occupants in a home?
yes. So, so that's what will drive, Dennis, whether it's whether the actual use rate is 50 or 75. So typically, based on census data here in the state of New Hampshire, we would assign, 2.5 persons per single family home. So you take the 2.5 population rate per home, multiply that 2.5 times, pick a number. It could be, if you did 75 gallons per capita per day, you would probably be up around the, 70,000 gallons a year number.
Okay.
Okay. So if you were more, what Dave used here was on the order of 45 gallons per capita a day, that puts you probably down around the 50,000 gallons per year number.
Right.
That's why I think I'm trying to focus your attention on the probable outcome here, which is look at your rates for the year-round resident, which I think is the issue and what was driving the question to get you this information. Look at that year-round resident at the 50 to 75,000 gallons per day use rate, and just go across and look at what their annual bill is going to be. And that will help you figure out what the sweet spot is for the year-round resident. And I think the sweet spot, in my look at Dave's numbers here, I think the sweet spot is, again, option 2 as opposed to maybe, and the sweet spot is option 2 relative to the other ones.
Right.
I'm not hearing a lot of concern about what the seasonal residents are going to pay. And I would also add too, if it adds complexity, but we've done rate studies where we've actually, again, maybe it doesn't work in the town of Lincoln because you have seasonal population really, all year round because, you have Loon Mountain and you have, people want to be up in that part of the country, during the summer as well. But we have communities where there's a vast difference in seasonal use between, like in the Lakes region. Obviously the Lakes region population, even in like my hometown, we go from 6,000-7,000 in population to 30,000 in the summer. So that in that they don't have a water system, but in that particular instance, like the town of Meredith would be a good example. We've done work with the town of Meredith, and we helped them develop their rate structure years ago. We actually established with a seasonal rate structure so that we could capture that seasonal population. And they were, again, that was to push the cost onto that portion of the population. And that made sense because the town actually had to build infrastructure to support that population. So that was the rationale for pushing the cost structure onto that portion of the population as opposed to the year-round resident. And you might be able to do something here to, again, get more of your revenue from the seasonal customer as opposed to the year-round. So you can maybe tweak that number.
Do we know what the count is of the seasonal versus year-round?
We
In other words,
don't.
Are there 4 times more seasonal than there are year-rounders?
I don't
And
think-
again, we're really looking at seasonal water use versus year-round water use.
Right.
And so it's very difficult because of, a lot of these condos, even if they're not a full-time year-round resident, they could be used year-round through Airbnb or a homeowners rental program or whatever, they can be used year-round.
Somebody had to make an estimate of, in order to come up with these costs.
Well, essentially, Dave has done that here. With the rates you see in front of you are, of course, Dave has to make some assumptions, several assumptions, in large part because he doesn't have the data. He doesn't have meter data across the different user categories in your system. The data just doesn't exist. So he's making some assumptions here when he's putting his financial model together and coming up with this rate structure that you see in front of you. So, but in my conversations with Dave, this is about as close as you're going to get based on the information that's available to him in order to, generate a rate structure that's going to address all the town's concerns and, make sure that, it's fair, it's equitable, it's transparent. That's really the goals here of the rate study. So, I think the answer to that question is, I don't think there's any way for us to calculate exactly how many, what the seasonal customers are going to do. Particularly
The
even though
year-round
a
number
lot of
looks
seasonal
good. It's
customers
the
are here for a
seasonal
month,
number
2
that
months at a
question.
time now, not for 2 weeks.
Go ahead.
I said the
Yeah.
year-round number looks pretty good. You just question the seasonal number, I guess, is the only thing. And that can be changed.
Yeah,
You know,
like Ray said, this is just based on a lot of assumptions.
Mm.
It's going to take us, first of all, it's going to take us to March to even know if we're going to go forward with this.
Mhm.
If the decision is made in March to go forward with installing meters, I don't know how soon we're going to actually get all of those physically installed into every one of the units. And then, I don't know if we put this, the day the last meter is installed, do we start charging these rates? Or do we start maybe the next calendar year and would get an idea? But like Ray said, we're going to end up tweaking these. We might get to the end of the year, and if what Jay said comes true, let's say no one goes over the 9,000 gallon limit, we're going to definitely change the rates because we'll only have 50% of the revenue to cover the expenses. But it's definitely going to need some tweaking. And if I'm around during this, I would want to keep this an open process where it's not just the 3 board of selectmen doing it. I don't know if we need water committee meetings or have it at the board of selectmen level, but have it be a public hearing and get people to come. But I would want it to be an open process to look at the rates.
Yeah, and just the rates that Dave has presented here to you are rates based on your current cost structure. So the rates that are here, based on the assumptions that he's articulated, will provide the financial wherewithal for you to support your system. I don't know if that helps, but. So these are the rates that you would expect, and, you know, out of the gate, your first year, this would be the kind of the rate structure that you would put in place. And as time, you know, as after the first year, you certainly that'll definitely should get you through the first year. I don't think you won't have enough revenue coming in based on Dave's analysis here. I certainly wouldn't expect that. Dave's numbers are based on your current cost structure, and that's what these numbers reflect to support that cost structure.
Right. The two things that Dave did know is the, at least a close approximation of the number of metered residents that we have, or not even residents, metered buildings, resident, commercial, industrial, whatever. And he knows what the total gallonage is that we used in a year. So he might be off in his categories, but ultimately he's looking at, call it 3,000 meters at a million gallons a day. So his estimate should be, as Ray just said, fairly accurate in the total picture. Any other comments? What do people think of option 2?
I think I prefer option 4 as well, just to be a little higher on the scale and make sure that when we get a year or so into this, we're not going to shock everyone in town when we need to raise rates significantly to cover costs. And I don't think that number, if we stay at that 50,000 line, you know, that annual number is, to me, that's not a deal breaker for people, I don't think. Well, year-round residents, I should say. So I think it would be entertained by people.
I think I'm with Jay. I certainly like the allowance in option 2 and option 4. But as Jay said, being a little on the higher side, I would be concerned about having to raise the rates soon after implementation, and that might upset some people. I'm a year-round resident, family of 4, all girls except for me, so I'd be on the higher side of that.
It's always easier to reduce the rates a little bit than to raise them.
That's true.
Very true.
I also think our voting residents are going to want to hear that we're putting more burden on seasonal folks than on them. And in that world, it sounds like to me like, you know, 4, it puts more of that on them. It puts more of it on us too, as to Ray's point, but I think it's more so onto the seasonal aspect of this analysis.
And Jay, that's kind of how I was looking at it. I took the 50,000 gallon one and said, okay, if I'm a year-round resident, I'm paying $256. If I use the same amount of water, but I use it in a condensed amount of time, I'm paying $489. And that's kind of how I looked at that comparison, that there should be a surcharge, let's say, to use all of your water in a condensed amount of time. Because for the time you're not using water and contributing to the volumetric charge, like I said, we're still running pumps and tanks and manpower and all of that. So that was one of my thoughts. I'm happy with option 2, but I do like the burden increase in option 4 on the seasonal.
So let me just interject on, because there is the key driver for even doing a rate structure is in support of putting meters in order to drive conservation. So that's the key here. So you have to think about this rate structure within that context. And if you're getting, I think Dave would agree with this, but if you're getting 50% of your revenues off a off of your fixed charge, then that's going to favor the higher volume users. And you're not going to drive conservation as much as if you got 20% of your revenues from the fixed charge. So the volumetric charge, which is where you're going to get your conservation from. If you're getting 80% of your revenues out of that, people are going to use up that 9,000 without thinking about it. And after 9,000, they're going to start thinking about it because their bill's going to start going up. And that's the part of the bill that they can control. So from a conservation standpoint, I think option 2 is your better bet. That's why I'm suggesting that option 2 is kind of that sweet spot, because it achieves the two things that I understand the town wants to achieve, which is conservation. You want to drive conservation so you can, get the most out of the existing infrastructure you already have in the ground and minimize your capital expenditures going forward. And I can tell you, capital expenditures, not your operational expenses like, electricity and chemicals and that sort of thing. Your capital expenditures is what's going to drive your rates. I see that all across the state because, we're facing infrastructure that's 35, 40 years old. And that's the thing that we spend a lot of our time with our clients trying to manage and control those capital expenditures. So I think option 2, you might find as the better option to achieve that, keeping the cost off of the year-round resident as much as you can while also driving conservation.
Let me ask this, Ray. The 4 options we see in front of us are really centered around residential use, which is of the 3,000 hookups we have is the vast majority.
Yep.
For those that are not the 5/8 inch hookup, he, in his last proposal, he had incrementally higher quarterly fixed charges for each one of those.
Right.
Okay. So I assume that that's going to be the same. Now, if we take option 2 and there's a 9,000 usage allowance for a 5/8 inch pipe, would there be a higher allowance, say, for a 2, 3, 6 inch pipe, or do you think he's intending it to remain at 9,000?
Well, Dave's going to just throw that question back on you. And so this gets to the issue of what we call complexity in your rate structure. So it really, you have to think about how you want to do business. So if you want to try to capture that incremental difference that you might get from a 1-inch service versus a 5-inch service on a residential customer, you're going to have to go out and figure out, okay, who has a 1-inch, who has a 5/8 inch. That's going to take time, energy, and effort to do, number one. And then your billing is going to be more complicated to administer. So one of the things you have to weigh when you're putting a rate structure together is how far do we want to drill down into the complexity of our rates? How much do we want to slice and dice this thing to get incremental revenue that will help us? So I think Dave would probably argue in this case is that, have a rate for your residential customers, set it at 9,000 gallons per quarter use rate, and it is what it is, rather than trying to go chase, that 1-inch residential user. And I do know that just from our peer review in South Peak, I do know that a lot of those bigger homes up there are putting in 1-inch service lines. So some of those folks you can get, but I got to believe the majority of your users are on that 5/8 inch line, and there might be only a handful that are on the 1-inch line, and it may not be worth that incremental revenue to chase to try to administer it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. What about, and I guess we'll pick on Dennis because he's here and I think he has the biggest pipe in town. But what about a 3-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch pipe? I guess I'm not as concerned about the, dozen houses up in South Peak that might have a 1-inch residential line as I am about the commercial users that have 3, 4, and 6-inch lines.
Is that a question for Dennis?
Oh,
Oh,
I can answer that very simply. We're allowed more than 9,000 gallons in other buildings that I have like that.
you
I
are.
don't know, I don't know what the number is, but yes, we are.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
so,
But at the end of the day, it almost comes up to this, to the same, so you're allowed the volume more than 9,000 gallons, but we'll use more than that, and at the end of the day, I end up paying a lot for the service that's there, so.
Right.
I don't know if that helps with the answer. It
OJ.
balances out. I really wish I had like five of my different user bills in front of me to show you. I just don't right now. And I could in a couple of weeks, but
So OJ, maybe that's worth, doing a little bit of investigation on to see, okay, what is that incremental revenue that we would generate if we broke our residential users down into, the various meter sizes. I mean, if you can identify, and you will, I should take this back, because ultimately, once you put the meters in, you'll know right then and there, and you'll be able to document who
absolutely,
has what service.
absolutely.
So you'll walk into,
Forgive me, Ray, but that's the way we do it.
right.
The town knows what size meter is in every building, because
Yeah,
we're
so-
buying the meters, you're installing them, so it's there.
OJ, that was the question I had too, because that was one of the concerns with the aggregate units, residential units, because we would have bigger pipe sizes coming in to feed those units probably. And so again, how do we balance that? And our usage, like if I take, like Mansion Hill is 8 units per building, Riverfront, it can be 12, 15, so I took 12. So we would use, instead of 9,000, using that as a base, we would use 108,000 in one of those buildings, so it's a big difference. And if you throw a pipe size on top of that, I think that's again, and why I wrote what I did, because I think we really have to consider that type of building and residential use as part of this project. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah, and-
it's a lot, it's 20%. If you're putting in 3,000 meters, there are 600 residents that are not going to get that service, So how are we going to handle that?
I think that's an important question, but can we,
Yeah, no, but that's why it would stem from the pipe size, it's the same
Yeah.
thing, the pipe size. Yeah.
Hey, can I ask, I don't think I know this about pipe size and stuff, but I'm just going to make an assumption here. But some of pipe size has to do with, on a commercial level, some of pipe size has to do with fire prevention and measures that are within the building, I would imagine. So if we're focused on conservation of water, and most of the time, hopefully, that building isn't going to use the size of pipe that it was designed for because of what it was designed for. So if I'm right about that, and it may not be, but if I am, it doesn't necessarily make sense to apply a rate at a 6-inch pipe size, because we're hoping that building's focused on conservation like everyone else from a residential standpoint. And if they're not, they're paying more for the gallons that they're using. So I think Ray may have said something to, why be too complex about what we're doing here, and I think I'd support that too.
Yeah, Jay, I could just comment on, as far as the, as far as the rate is based on the domestic water service that comes into the building. It's, a fire line typically is a separate line.
It is, okay.
Yeah. So, and sometimes, again, some communities, some of the communities we deal with have actually large industries in town, and, there's a separate charge for that fire line. And it's a lot of times it's just a fixed charge for the fire line, and then they'll have a they'll get, they'll get two bills, one for on the domestic side of that building, service side, and then also one on the industrial side for the fire line that comes in for the sprinkler system. So,
Yeah, thanks.
OJ,
Ed,
I have to go along with Cindy. The usage allowance has to go along with the pipe size coming into the building, because Cindy's right. I'll give you an example. At Pollard Brook, I have some buildings that are 30 units and some buildings 16 units. So it's predetermined when the buildings are built that the meter that's in there is a certain size for the 16, and the meter that's in there for the 30 units is a bigger size. So the usage allowance would go along, and that's a calculation. I don't know how to make that calculation, but it should go along with the pipe size. I would think that would be even with a South Peak. If you have a South Peak home that has an inch or an inch and a half line coming in, or even a 2-inch line, maybe not a 2-inch line, but that's because there's 8 bedrooms in that particular house. So that's how it would have to follow.
go
OJ,
ahead, Butch. Yep.
yeah, I'm getting in late in the conversation, but to the current conversation, we know, we have documented, there is a single family residence in South Peak that has 12 bedrooms, has a 2-inch line going to it.
Yeah.
That's a lot different than a 5/8 line to a normal one resident. So again, I'm late. I was in another meeting, but so that is true. I think the allocation should be sized to the inlet, to the structure, whatever size the structure is. And then to drive conservation, we put gallons to it, I think. I don't know which option. I don't have that in front of me, so I'm talking without those 4 options in front of me, but thanks. That's it.
Well, I think we're looking at either option 2 or option 4.
OJ, I have a question. What is the goal for today? We received this today a couple of days ago. I forget when. Is the goal to make a decision, option 2 or 4 today? I'd like to look at it a little bit more. I might come up with a couple, 3 more questions.
I don't think we need to decide on this today. But what I do think we need to do sooner than later is agree as a committee to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that we include on the town warrant in March a bond issue for water meters, if we're going to go that route. Last year, we didn't recommend it because we wanted to see what the rate structure was first. We don't have the rate structure, but we're certainly closer. Because really, the board is looking at warrant articles on Monday. Now, we don't need this committee's recommendation to go forward, but that's kind of was the purpose of forming this committee, was to look at the whole water meter rate structure situation. And do we have to have it by this Monday? Well, no, because then it's going to go to budget committee, and you know how long that process takes. So
we'll blow it out.
it's going to take a while to go through. So I don't want to pretend that we have to have an answer today, because no, we don't. But budget, we've actually gave a draft budget to the budget committee, but we're looking at warrant articles on Monday, and I think we'll be presenting our final-ish budget to the budget committee the next day. Now, if we want to wait and meet, probably Christmas week is not going to be good for most people, but maybe the week after New Year's.
Week after New Year's.
Look at the rate structure again. Is there anything, if from this meeting, is there anything that we want to either ask Dave from Raftullis or recommend, or you know, do we want to look at what his suggestion is? Because again, he gave us this breakdown of the different pipe sizes and monthly charges. Do we want that and say, we're really thinking of option 2 or option 4? What would the pipe size charges be? Or do we not need that amount of breakdown to make this decision?
I think it'd probably be useful.
I think it would be. I think I'd really like to go back and look at a couple of rate structures that I have in some other of my properties, and I might come up with a couple more questions or a couple solutions that I'd like to present.
So OJ, let me just interject here. So I'll give you the consultant's perspective on this. So we're going to have to, at this point, you're going to have to come back to Dave with specific questions that you have regarding the rate structure, because I mean, you can massage these numbers in a myriad of ways to get to a certain rate. And I wouldn't recommend you do that, because you're going to be spending a lot of that time and money with Dave to do
Right.
that.
Okay,
So my suggestion here would be, I think the information that's been developed to date is sufficient to answer the question, is this affordable to our community? Is moving forward with meters and financing our water and sewer operations this way, as opposed to off of a rate structure versus off of our tax base, is this the better way forward? I think that's the better way to craft the question, maybe for the committee. And if the committee says, yes, this is a better way for what we want to do, which is what I'm hearing is, you know, we want rates that are fair, equitable, transparent, and that's going to drive conservation so that we can minimize our capital expenditures going forward. Because you're going to have to if you keep down the path you are now with the development that's happening in your community, you're going to have to make more and more investments. I mean, we're talking about building more water storage tanks, and you know, those are the $1.5 to $2 million projects that are just driving up the cost of your service delivery. So if you want to get a better handle on that and to better manage that, going with having people pay for what they use, you know, is going to keep that expenditure down.
If there's any return on investment for this project with installing meters, that would be very helpful too in trying to sell it to the town.
The return on the investment is going to be hard to pinpoint, because you don't know what the behavior ultimately is going to look like. So again, just like Dave did through all, you know, generating all these numbers for you, you're going to have to make some, you know, big assumptions as to what you think is going to happen. And again, every community is different because their profile is different, whether they, you know, most of the water use is industrial water use versus residential. So there's a myriad of variables that get plugged into the equation, and there's a myriad of solutions that can come out of the back end of that analysis. But I think if you have specific questions of your consultant, now would be the time to ask those specific questions. I wouldn't send them out on, you know, more analysis to say, what if we did this and what if we did that? He'll crunch the numbers, you'll get those numbers, and you're going to be in the same conversation trying to pick out what the best number is. So I think there's enough information there for you to make a decision as to whether or not meters and financing your water and sewer operations with a rate structure, maybe not this particular one we see in front of us, but with a rate structure, to me, that would be the question for the water committee to ask itself for a recommendation to the board. Is that helpful?
yes, very.
And if I can just give an example. This summer, we had a drought, and as most everybody here knows, we issued the board, we requested the Board of Selectmen put a water restriction on the whole town. And most people in town, high majority of people in town complied. And in one day, we saw 100,000 gallon a day drop in the amount of water we needed to process. 100,000 gallons. So when there's stuff on the line, and I think just the fact that they know at the end of 9,000 gallons, the meter starts ticking, that's conservation. Some of it's psychological, but it'll happen. And I think that is the goal. That's gonna milk the life of our current infrastructure and infrastructure that's proposed for a lot of years. And that's, I think, so Ray, everybody's on point. I think that would be, your town manager feels that would be a huge win for the community. I just think it is, so.
Yeah, and I think that anecdotal information that Butch just shared is really important, because I think it speaks really to the gap, right? It speaks to, what people are just going to use. And then when they're asked to use less, they actually responded. And that 100,000 gallons for a system of your size is a big number. That could be the difference between, because I think right now, I think at the water treatment plant, you're at full build out. I think you got all the units, all the treatment units in that building that you can put in that building. So
We have one more. We
You can
have
put
one
one
more to
more
go,
in?
Ray. We
Okay,
have
that's
one more
good.
cell. Yeah.
good, that's good. So maybe you got 3 out of the 4 that you're going to put in. That's a good thing, because I'm dealing with some clients that, they're right now, they're going to have to do a building addition and expand a building. That's a big number. It's a huge difference between putting in a unit process in an existing building that can accommodate an upgrade or an expansion on a facility versus building a new building that has to be built because we just don't have any place to put the additional unit process to treat the water necessary to deliver to our customers. And we all know that, in dealing on the peer reviews with the hotels that we have in front of us, you're starting to bump your head against that ceiling again. So now's the time to figure out the lower cost solution. Getting back to the question about, what is the return on investment? You're going to spend maybe $1.5 million to put in water meters. And that $1.5 million will go in a heartbeat on an expansion on a treatment plant, a new water storage tank. The list goes on.
And at the same time, and that's why, I'm representing these aggregate condominium people, driving conservation. And if we're going to bring a recommendation to the board, or we're going to move forward, because it will impact the cost, I bring up the consideration of metering to the residential units that exist within those aggregate condos. There's 600 units. That's a lot of residential units, a lot of conservation. It would be very difficult as a condominium association to drive that, because it's not felt directly by the user. Plus the fact it's difficult for us to manage. So at least, and I think even minimally, if you just did those that are purely residential, not partly hotels, we're talking 300 more meters. We all have shutoffs. It's not unlike when they put the meters in the 1990s. They just went into the shutoffs in our townhouses, because we have 16 townhouses as well as our garden styles. I just think it would be a lot more effective to go to every pure residential unit. That's just the way we feel. But that, I think we have to talk about, because that would change the project.
Yes, and if I could just interject on that, I guess I would agree with that. If you could get all those meters into each one of those residential units, that would probably be more beneficial from a conservation standpoint. But again, it adds complexity to, how you administer the program. And, if you could send one bill to, a homeowners association, as opposed to, 600 bills to individual unit owners, it really simplifies it simplifies the administration, and it reduces your administration costs. That means maybe you don't have to hire that extra person in order to handle the billing of those, extra units that you have to send bills out to, and also manage, because you're going to have to replace meters. So it's a matter of replacing at some point in its service life, you got to replace those 600 meters. If it was like 1 or 2 meters, then obviously the cost of those meter replacements are less. So there are some cost advantages to the expense side of your operation if you can aggregate the users as opposed to having them individually metered.
But
And
that
I would
doesn't,
also,
but
if-
they are residential units. They are individual taxpayers. That's where your conservation lies. That's how
Yeah.
it's driven. And, you know, it would be much more effective to do that. Again, we all have shut-offs. It would be no different than when they installed them into the townhouses and residential homes years ago. Maybe this is a second phase that we could consider, but not doing that, then I think we have to really be cognizant of the pipe size, of what our load would be per building. Like if you take something like a Nordic Inn, you know, I mean, you've really got to make, you in your rate structure, or somehow you have to account for the fact that you have 100 residential units in there. You know what I mean? So that has to be, and when I looked at the Raffaella study or the study that was done, they didn't separate that out as a class of residences. And it
No,
really
they didn't.
is a separate class. So I guess that's what I'm saying. I could go either way, but you have to treat that as a separate class.
and again, that would be an excellent question that would be a specific question you can put in front of your consultant. Again, given the unique profile of your community, because your community from a cost structure standpoint is unique. I mean, not every community has the makeup that you do in terms of condos and residential units and the transient population. Your community is very unique. So I think you're going to have to, Raftellus is going to have to come alongside you and tweak, and get into more of the weeds of what your structure should ultimately look like to address those questions you just posed.
You know, Ray, I think Cindy has a good point as far as, if we're doing this to increase conservation, then, the more we're able to put meters in individual units, the more that those unit owners are going to watch their bill.
Yes.
And my thinking is that if the units, these types of units are set up that a water meter can go in, that the town should do it. What I don't want to see the town have to get involved in is jackhammering up concrete floors, ripping down sheetrock,
Yeah.
replumbing copper,
Nope.
doing all that stuff to try to get a meter into each unit. That's not our responsibility. And we want to stay away from that. But if a unit has a single line going into each unit that's accessible and would hold a meter, I would think that we would want to do that.
Yeah, I think, well, you're right. But again, you have to look at the margin, the marginal benefit against the cost. I mean, you just brought it up. I mean, if the cost of installing a meter is, $3,000, and if you don't put meter in there, you save a few pennies on the, you don't capture a certain level of revenue or drive a certain level of conservation. You got to look at you got to basically assess the value proposition of how you want to structure your rates and how you want to administer your rate structure. I mean, if you have to add 2 more staff positions at town hall in order to implement this rate structure, that's added cost to your operation, your cost of doing business. So it isn't just, and asking these questions are good questions, but you have to look at both sides of the equation from a business perspective to make sure that you're making the right choice for your community. And I'm not proposing one way or another. I think when you pull the trigger and say, this is what we want for our community, which is we want to drive conservation and we think meters are the way to do it. And if we're going to put in meters, we're going to have a rate structure. If you're not going to have a rate structure, I don't recommend you put in the meters, that's for sure. So the meters and the rate structure go hand in hand. If you're not willing to do one, I certainly wouldn't do the other. So I think once that decision is made, then it's a matter of taking a more detailed look at the profile of your community and figuring out, what is the best way to achieve the ultimate objectives that you want to achieve. So, and I know you're not there yet, but I do believe you have enough information in front of you now to answer the question, do we want to do this or don't we want to do this? Because the rates that you see in front of you here, if these all look reasonable to everybody sitting around the table, chances are they'll look reasonable to most of the residents in your community. And the rates that I'm looking at here are pretty good compared to what I see in other communities.
And I,
Okay.
if I can just say it from a management standpoint, while I understand Cindy's concern for the associations, I think if we look at it from management standpoint, our goal is to monitor water going into, let's say, a 16-unit condo. From a town standpoint, if there's water abuse in that building, to go to every unit, yes, there's an advantage. Even though the taxpayers, we're just relieving what I suspect is a huge headache on the board of directors for that association. But I can almost guarantee that if the cost of water going into that building is extremely high because of one or two scofflaws in the building, and everybody in that building starts sharing in the cost, it will self-police itself. That's my belief. Now, down the road, after we get this thing up and running and we know what our revenues are, and we dedicate X amount of dollars per year, and we decide we want to go in and do every meter in the building, we could do that on a more gradual basis as a plan, and but accomplish out of the gate for the best bang for the buck is, if we can, and it comes down to that, how easy would be one to each unit versus in Cindy's, obviously their case is there's a lot of their units are in concrete, the lines are actually running concrete. So I would advocate for one to the building, out of the box, and maybe we agree that down the road, as funds become available, that we move to make it more, refine it. That's my 2 cents.
I'm not
And
opposed
Butch,
to putting one
they're
in
not,
every single unit. However, if we've got one condo association and we're able to put them in each individual unit without a giant construction cost for every single building in the complex. If that's not possible, then it has to be, we have to do it fairly and equally in every single unit in that complex. For instance, if you've got condo association A over here and they have 5 buildings and we can easily put meters in every single individual unit without giant construction costs. Great, let's do all of them. But then you've got condo association B over there that's got 10 units. Now 2 or 3 of them we could put in every single unit. But there's, the rest of them, there's just no way it can be done without huge construction costs. And I don't think any of them should have it. All of those should go to each individual unit. And I know there's one small one in town here that's only got, I think, 6 units. And I know one of them, because I almost bought the unit, the water comes in one unit and then into the bathroom of that unit. And then the other water comes in another unit and then into the kitchen of that unit. So it's literally fed by 2 separate pipes coming in to the center of that unit. Those type of things we're not going to be able to meter. We're not going to be able to cost effectively put meters in those specific units. That should not be up to the town. That should be up to the condo association to do that if they want each one metered individually.
and I don't disagree, but like in Riverfront, every unit, whether it's a townhouse or a garden style unit, we all have an individual shut off in a closet that just feeds that unit. That's how it works. The same, I think it's the same at Mansion Hill, because I talked to some of these people. Someplace like Nordic Inn, we're all wood. Most of us are wood structures. I think the only one I know that's all concrete is Nordic Inn, but I think Scott even told me every one of those units has a shut off, because that's I know at Riverfront, if you have to shut your water off when you leave. So in case there is a leak or something, it doesn't damage the other units. Everything is contained within that unit. The minute it comes in that unit, there's a shut off right there. You put the meter right after the shut off. That's the way it works. That's how they did our townhouses. And those shut offs were all internal. So it is possible. It's not a difficult thing to do. I even read somewhere where they now make meters, I don't know if they can use them, that run electronically on the pipe. Because I did a little research, but Ray knows more about that than I do. But it's not, there are no construction costs in most of the condo associations that I'm aware of with respect to metering. They just go to the shut off. So, but depending on how we want to do this part of this project going forward, I think if we don't include those residential units, if we don't include the residential units at this time, that, we do it later, then we have to do something in the cost structure again to account for the fact that we are feeding multiple residents from a single pipe, or, it's being billed. Multiple people are being put on one bill. Whatever makes sense. But it's not difficult to put the shutoffs in, or to put the meter in at the shutoffs.
Obviously, I think that issue is going to need to be discussed more. I would be in favor of anything that's accessible and you can plop a meter in, for the sake of being as fair as we can to everyone, and metering is, encouraging conservation. I think that we should do that, put those meters in. I know that there's some units, some structures that it's just impossible, like the one Tammy was talking about.
Right.
And I don't see, I think if the condo unit is ready for a meter, a single line into a single unit,
It's no
whether that
brainer.
gets done the first shot right here, or we do that over time, either way is fine with me. But I think that should be done. And if condos that have these convoluted systems that share pipes and all that, if they want to bother to repipe, we'll go in and put a meter in after they do it, but that's on them, not the town.
I think that makes sense, OJ. I think that makes perfect sense to me. Yep.
And
Just-
maybe the way to articulate that from a business standpoint is, it becomes a policy that, the policy is that we will install meters in every individual unit where it's cost effective to do so, and the town will decide how to define cost effective. And in those cases, if it's not cost effective, then we're going to go to Plan B for those particular users. And the other thing you could do is to get a handle on that, you can do a survey of your community. You can go into those buildings in question and have somebody come in and make an assessment. A meter installation company might be able to do what we call a pre-installation survey to determine just what does that look like for your particular community. Is it 3 condo associations? Is it 1? Is it, you can do that to get a better handle even before you pull the trigger on a full blown out meter program. And it might be worth actually doing in your particular case.
I think that's a good idea.
And just a sidebar, Cindy Fieldbelt, I believe that the initial prices we got was on the latest and greatest technology, which does not require cutting pipes. It's putting the sensor on the outside of the pipe, and it goes to the satellite, and it's all remote, so you can put on an app and monitor your own water usage, and it's all the latest and greatest. So you're right on point. So,
Oh, excellent, because I did some research, and that's what I
Oh.
saw with these electronic things that go right on the
Yep.
pipe, doesn't require cutting, so you just go in and put it there. Yep,
I
that would
believe
be great.
we'll be doing the latest and greatest. So, yep,
Yeah.
if we do this, yep.
Those are also easy if you ever have to reinstall them too, so from a
Yep.
maintenance standpoint, excellent, excellent.
All right, so at this point, are we is this committee ready to make a recommendation that we move forward with a bond issue for water meters in 2021?
But
I would
will
say,
we-
I would say yes, OJ.
I would say yes, and when we look at that bond, will we consider doing, additional meters where appropriate into those residential units?
Yeah, I think that the, what did he call it? The pre-installation survey that Ray talked about
Mhm.
would be a part of the process that whoever we hire to do this, go talk to these condo associations and see, who's ready to have a meter installed right away versus who needs to do replumbing or rip out sheetrock or jackhammer floors or whatever needed to reach the pipe.
That sounds good.
And I might suggest, I came in late, but if Cindy has done some legwork and she's identified, I'd have to check with Nate, but if the 600 units that she's come up with aren't part of Nate's original 3,000 meter estimate, we will just up that and do the math so that we come up with a figure for a bond issue that's closer to what we actually have in town. That's my,
Nate's figures were based on tax bills, so I would believe those would be included in.
okay. So the 3,000 included for 600. Okay, so we're probably going to be very close.
So
And
this,
for-
I
as far as a bond.
thought the original one said we were only going to replace meters where where meters were originally installed either in
No.
the 1990s or in new build. The 3,000 was all the residential units in town?
That's that was Nate's best estimate of, and Dave Bowden's current best estimate of existing meters in town, including anything that's been put in.
Right,
the
that's
last
just
couple of years.
meters.
That's what Cindy's saying, existing meters.
Existing meters. This is 600, these are 600 residential units that, they only have one meter coming in to
Okay.
feed those 600.
Then we'd have to bump it up by 600 and do the math. And that's I'm going to recommend that's the board, that's what the number will be. And I don't know what that number is,
We're
but
gonna have to refine, we've been talking about $1.2 million on about 3,000 meters. When we're ready to take this step forward, we will refine both of those numbers.
Can I ask a question though? Have you
Yeah.
got a good estimate of what it costs to install one of these? Because if
Yes.
it's just wrapped around a pipe, isn't there some kind of electrical connection that also has to be made to transmit the signal?
the time we did these numbers, John, you got that right from, I believe you got it from, it was a installation company. We'll update the numbers, but that included the installation cost per meter based on this company's expertise. So that 1.2, and that's a couple of years old now. I mean, I think we've been talking about, so we'll update that number.
Okay.
And those, they've got it down pat of what it takes to install these numbers. And that includes the technology here at Public Works or the town hall for the computerization and the reading it off the internet and that whole thing. So, so we'll update those numbers if we proceed.
All right, so I heard from Dennis that you'd be in agreement. Jay?
Yep.
Yes? John?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
I'm gonna say yes. Butch?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
And yes,
And Jane?
She's
Yes.
on mute. Oh,
Did you
Yes.
answer for her?
Takes a couple hits.
Okay, that is Jane. All right. I thought Tammy said yes for you.
No.
All right. And Ray, you don't get a vote.
We're here to serve.
That would be a good recommendation then. Now, do we want to meet that first week of January, the first week after New Year's? And look at the rate structure. Dennis, maybe you want to bring some bills we can talk about.
I would like to, if others would. I probably would be able to add some insight as to other scenarios, which it comes close to this, but
Want to do Thursday, January 7th at 3 o'clock?
That sounds good to me.
Thursday, January 7th, 3 p.m.
sounds good to me. Lincoln budgets after that, but it's okay.
That'll be an exciting day for you.
There we go.
Oh,
A
yeah,
long day.
I just don't want to overwork Ron. He's at the controls there.
yeah.
Ron is so overworked right now, he won't even notice another meeting.
Right.
He was with the planning,
He'll
the
do it.
planning board last night went till after 10 o'clock.
Oh
I
my
know, I
God.
watched it.
It was long. I watched I watched
Oh.
I watched the reruns today.
Oh,
But I'm able to fast forward, so.
oh,
I tell you, I have still not watched a YouTube video of our meetings. I can't live through it more than once.
That's a good point. That's a good
Haven't watched
point.
any.
I've gone back just to listen to the snippets to say, did he really just say that? Other than that, I don't watch.
oh.
Oh, too much fun.
And OJ, if you wanted to have someone go in and look at some of these condo associations to look at how the shut-offs are structured, I can probably set that up for someone with some of these condos.
Cindy, I suspect somebody from Public Works will absolutely be taking all of you folks up on that at some point. I mean,
Okay, yep,
sure.
and they can come in and look and say, okay, yeah, this is doable, we just do it this way.
Yeah.
You know, and I know all of the riverfront shut-offs come in right where our hot water heaters are. And actually the co-op actually has a monitor set up, so I know there's electricity in all those closets and everything.
Yeah, I would think that's gonna be a step to do once, once we're pretty confident that we're moving forward,
Okay,
that we would take that up.
yep, awesome.
We have a recommendation now from this group. The board will talk about this Monday night. Then the budget committee will get it. And on January 7th, we'll have another discussion about rates. Anything else? All right, do we want to make a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, all those in favor?
Bye.
Hi.
Like.
Thank you,
Ray.
everyone.
Thank you.